All right. Hey, we are live. Welcome to PHP Vancouver, the October edition. We missed last month because we were busy/lazy. So maybe we will do 2 talks this month. Maybe we won't. We'll just take it as it goes, see how things are. But just to kind of let people know who we've got James, our standard other co-organizer, and then we got James LaChance, who is going to be our speaker. And our normal thing now that we're starting to get used to this whole remote cadence that's different from our in-person cadence. We're just going to spend the next 10 minutes kind of just catching up on what's going on in the Laravel PHP universe and gathering some thoughts and opinions about what's going on. So, James, how are we going to refer to each other?
You just call me. I was actually going by JD at my last job because there was another James there.
Okay, so James D, you and I were talking briefly about what's going on in the Laravel ecosystem with respect to, I guess, Taylor Otwell and the community, and struggling with that. And I'm not as involved in all of that stuff. And my take on it, like there were some people saying that Jetstream was uploaded piece of software, and there was a lot of harsh comments, I think, and people were saying Taylor only likes people. I'm paraphrasing here, that Taylor only likes people that lick his boots or stuff like that. And they were being pretty harsh on some of the things, and a lot of the opinions came across like, or sorry, I shouldn't say a lot. A few of the opinions came across like, you're doing open source, you were doing it for the customer. Right. And then other people are like, well, no, it's open source. It's his decision. He's maintaining it. So why should he do it? Open source, it doesn't have the concept of a customer. So people have different opinions on how open source should work. And there are a lot of people out there that are really aggressive about how this whole thing should work. I think to the point that Taylor deleted his Reddit account just because he felt there was a lot of negativity, and whether that was the right thing or wrong thing, I don't know. But I do think removing negativity from your life as a general thing is good.
Yeah.
LaChance, what's your take on it? I know you had some things to say on Twitter.
So I think it's pretty simple. There are two mindsets of open source, and I got into a somewhat of a discussion or a debate, depending on what you want to call it, with a pretty good friend of mine. I think the notion of being like a user of an open source framework or any sort of package, just npm package or package, just doesn't really matter. Having the idea that like the person the maintainer must listen to you because you are their customer. In this case, you're not a paying customer, you're just a user of this package. I think that's a very arrogant and entitled attitude to take. Most packages I've used anyway, including the ones that I've authored, have all been, hey, this solved a problem for me. If you want to use this to solve your problems too, go ahead. But that should not mean I now must take on the burden of solving your extra problems that this did not quite solve. And there's definitely a burden of, well, now if you submit a PR of a feature that I don't really care to use, I'm going to be the one stuck maintaining it when you don't want to maintain it anymore. Mm-hmm. And you absolutely can't get rid of it after you've already had a feature, because then you're going to piss off some people who got used to that feature.
Yeah.
So there's this weird, like, I understand why people want Taylor to add stuff. I myself have wanted him to add stuff. But getting upset at him for not doing it, I think, is what I think is creating the entitled attitude. And I almost feel like they should be saying, can you come do my work for me? Because that's ultimately what it amounts to.
I would add to that the fact that I think there's a couple things. There's a couple, like, I would say that there's two approaches to sort of how Taylor's doing things. It's like he has sort of two jobs. He has to manage the Laravel as like a business and a framework, but then he also has to manage like the community side of it, which is like non-programming. So like, how can he make his non-programming life easy and his programming life easy? I mean, I don't really know how much. I mean, he obviously has employees now, and he can delegate some of that stuff more than he used to. But like, imagine trying to run a framework or run a project the size of Laravel. Arguably, it's like one of the largest projects on GitHub. It probably takes up more than an 8-hour day for him, even with employees. And on top of that, you have all these people complaining about the free thing that you're giving them. It's like I can definitely say where it just tears you down, or like at least gives you like some animosity towards those things. But I think that like remember when he pulled out the helpers, or like the idea was to pull the helpers out of the core project, and that caused a lot of people to be like, wow, this is why is this going on here? Is because that particular area of the project was surface area for people putting in these like ridiculous PRs, or like it was a big point of contention. So by taking that piece out of the core, those conversations left the core framework where they otherwise would get lost in a bunch of noise. So I think there's things that are strategic in terms of making sure that the project's easier to manage from like a GitHub perspective. Like it's easier to manage the Git, it's easier to manage the activity around the project. Then there's the strategies around like how is the code and the actual the thing that people are downloading managed. So it's like those are really hard problems to juggle all the time. And like, of course, no one's going to be happy. You split the project up in pieces. Everyone's like, great, I can go to the core project and browse the source code easier. Then a bunch of people are like, well, why is it different? It's over here now. I mean, you can't win for losing, right? Like, you split it up, people get mad. You make changes, people get mad. But at the end of the day, I think all of the successful projects that I've seen, they have some sort of like benevolent dictator. And not that I think Taylor's a dictator in any capacity, but there's a clear leader who's like, this is the direction we need to go. And I think that I don't think Laravel would be as successful. It was just if it was just at the whim of the community to decide what goes in and what goes out, what comes in and what comes out. So, yeah, is the project more successful than it was last year? If the answer is always yes, then like, what exactly are we complaining about? What exactly are we fighting about?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Sean, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know enough about CodeIgniter. I haven't used it for a long time, but I don't remember ever seeing a leader of CodeIgniter. And I know they sold it to a university up here in BC, actually. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember seeing a clear leader. Now CodeIgniter, to my purview, is not even on my radar. I very rarely ever see any job looking for CodeIgniter. But I think your point about having that clear and direct leader is incredibly valid.
Yeah. So, I mean, you won't agree with everything that they do, but you can't disagree unless if the project's still growing and people are still happy with it, or the majority are happy with it. It's sort of like, I don't know, it's like developer politics. It's got to be the worst job ever. Like, he's not a politician. He's a developer. Go ahead.
I keep lagging. I'm sorry. I like you'll pause, and I can't tell if it's my lag or if it's you actually pausing. I imagine if we were to actually have all of the community suggestions make it into Laravel, we would just end up having like a Symfony Part 2, Symfony almost done type. Because there's like a lot of the suggestions are quote unquote solid purity type related things, and it's like I don't want it to turn into that, because Symfony being opinionless has its place, but I mean, people choose Laravel a lot for those opinions. So if we were to get away from that and get into like the whole this is less opinionated thing, that would literally make Laravel opposite.
Yeah, I think it's just yeah, I mean, it's going to be so tough. I mean, Laravel's at a size right now where it's like, it's surprising that there's only a few core people working on it. I mean, what is there now? Like 5 maybe core people like really working on it? I can only name 2 off the top of my head. Yeah.
I can name 3, not counting Taylor. Mohammed, Dave Hemphill, and James Brooks.
Is it Graham is the other guy I was going to mention. Is it Graham?
No, there's James Brooks, there's Mohammed, there's Dries, and then there's one other one I'm forgetting. I know David Hemphill works on Nova, but I don't think he's considered an employee, but he might have something to do with Nova.
Yeah, in terms of commits, in order, it's Taylor, then Franz Lidke, Dries Vince and Graham Campbell, then Dale Reese, and then Phil Sparks. So like even the top 4 people, or top 6 people, sorry. I know Mohammed manages like other parts of the project, but he doesn't show up here. I don't think, at least I don't see it on the contributors for the actual Laravel. But I wonder if the framework is really different.
So I can never say his name, Nuno Ramato or something like that. He's the other employee. Edwin and Chat or Edwin and Bob both brought it up.
Oh, here we go. Sorry, I'm looking at the Laravel / framework repo. So first is Taylor, then Graham Campbell, then Mohammed, and then let's just say here, Lucas Michaud. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's a big project. There's like those top 4 people. There's a huge distance between how many commits Taylor has and then the next closest person. It's not even it's no contest. He has like 1,000 times more commits than the next person. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm happy with everything so far. I have no complaints really.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting close to when we passed the time when we on our thing we said we'd start presentations. So I know one of the other things we were going to talk about a little bit was Jetstream and Fortify, their new products. So why don't we actually, because I know the other James had some internet issue. Oh, he's back now.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, Jetstream and Fortify, actually, I set up a project with them. It works fantastically. I don't need anything more. But then again, my project follows the needs of kind of what those things are. I needed a way to be able to, let's say, edit a user password, delete an account. Now I just don't have to think about that. But I know other people have needs and different things they need for their application. One thing I've always said and believed is that Laravel provides you with the code, but it can also get out of the way if you don't want to use those things. And James, you and I know James Doyle, you and I know from a company that we worked at that will remain nameless, where there was a lot of extra stuff in the code. And it just got really hard to work on that. But Laravel gave you what you needed, and it got out of the way so you could do all this extra stuff. Whether I was good or bad, I'm going to leave that up in the air.
I mean, definitely when you can leverage the community to like get you stuff for free, like you either have to diverge like pretty dramatically from the goal of the largest, most popular open source project that solves your problem, or your problem probably is the wrong problem and you need to figure out how to make it fit into those projects. Like, for example, like a queue system, which is like a very basic thing that you end up reaching for once your application gets to a certain size. Those are just some things that you end up picking up. And if you wanted to roll your own queue, like, I'm sure it happens. I mean, there's a reason there's like 50 different queues out there, is because everyone has their own little take on how a queue is going to work. But for you to add queue number 51 to that list, like you have a damn good reason to not have to be able to use any of the queues out there. So for Laravel to step in and say like, hey, here's a bunch of core utilities that you can use. Here's a core setup with documentation, which is like insanely important, as well as like expectation that they're going to continue to support it, is like, okay, well, what exactly are we getting mad about here? We're getting mad that the ecosystem is better, that the tooling's better. Like, I don't know. I haven't used Jetstream personally, so I can't speak to like the actual like bits and nuts and bolts. But from your experience, it sounds like it's fantastic, and it's just yet another great Laravel thing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to think about is, like, I'm not trying to come across that like the fanboy that everybody says, oh, Laravel fanboys, oh, yes, men, but I've taken a lot of time to invest myself in understanding the framework. I don't understand everything, but there's a lot of things that are undocumented and things I'm still learning to this day. And those particular things, in my belief, if you take the time to learn them, I stand by my statement that, Laravel will give you the things that it will give you tools and it will get out of your way.
Mhm.
So all you have to do is invest in learning how does Fortify or Jetstream do what it does, and then you figure it out from there. That's just been my opinion, and that, like, we should invest time into understanding it as opposed to just thinking I can click a button and have this awesome thing out of the box and be on my way. And that's a scary thought that somebody can go out there, add in WordPress, I think, is a perfect example.
Mhm.
You can install all the plugins you want to build your site. Doesn't mean you're going to get the best experience, and it's really going to hurt you in the end more often than not. You have to be smart and learn your product as a developer.
Do you think do you think you'll use Jetstream for your next like project, even if you're only using like a sliver of it? Like, let's say you're just using authentication, would you use it, or would you just try to like use the base auth? Would you like kind of just grab some bits and pieces?
See, what I really liked about it, and forgive me, I forget which one is the UI, but regardless, this is the one thing I really like is I was able to have a page where I could, I like the ability to have the login, the registration, the forgot password, all that done. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to write tests for it. I know it works.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other part would, I could go to the profile page. So I could click on my name and I could actually see, I'm going off memory here. I could change my name. I could change my avatar. I could change my password. I could delete my account. I could set up 2-factor authentication if I so wanted. And then I could also, this was really cool, I could see all the sessions that my account has started. And I could see like the browser, the IP, is it active, is it not? And I could delete those sessions. I thought, you know what, that is so incredibly handy. And, you know, when maybe I'm building a new greenfield fast startup app today, why not have that for free?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's a no-brainer, but
I also think like I'm kind of dealing with this on another project that I'm working on where it's like people also have to recognize like just because you invest in something today doesn't mean you're going to be locked into it for the rest of your life. Like I was talking to a friend of mine who runs a company and I was saying like name a company, a large tech company that doesn't do a rewrite of an app like every 3 years. Like even like fresh apps, like even things like Uber's releasing new stuff all the time. It's like a pretty brand new company. And like the main core app has the offering to the customer hasn't really changed, but the delivery methodology changes like every few years. Even like someone like Airbnb, their business is like, you can explain it in a couple sentences, but every couple of years you see like big sweeping changes, or they post a blog saying like, oh, we redid this whole thing. Dropbox, another one. I constantly get emails like maybe once every couple of years from Dropbox saying like, we totally redid our back end. It's like 20% better now, or 10% faster, or it's cheaper. Like their engineering team is like really impressive. So I think that also looking at something like Jetstream is like, oh, it'd be great to start with Jetstream. Like use it as a starting point. Don't say we're going to always be using Jetstream. Like that statement is not going to hold up to scrutiny by saying, let's use this for now. I mean, we've both been part of projects where someone took something that was supposed to be temporary and ended up putting it into production, right? So I think it's just having that mindset of like, this is good enough until, and you actually put a date and you put a date or some sort of threshold in the future and say, hey, when we cross this threshold and we meet this milestone, we're going to redo this. We're going to rip this thing out and replace it with whatever the new thing is, or we're going to upgrade, or we're going to do whatever. So, yeah.
Well, my good friend, Matt Lance, he's the one that does all these, never mind, he does these videos, but anyways, he said all code must die. I think we should live by that. All code must die, and you know, something new and better is going to always come out.
Yeah, I say write stuff that's easy to delete. So I'm going to delete that. And I better not get too precious about anything, because like a week later, someone could be like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. Like, well, should I cry about this, or should I just Command A and then press delete? But
so why don't we get into it? We've gone, actually we went exactly 10 minutes over our timeline here. So we're getting into it. We've got James here, but welcome to PHP Vancouver. It's October 2020. Apologies for missing August. And Twitter, follow us at PHP Vancouver if you're not already. And if you're tweeting about the event tonight to celebrate or rant or complain, well, hopefully not complain, but use the band PHP hashtag so we can keep up on it. Maybe we'll retweet it.
Yeah.
James, you want to talk about this one?
Yes. Sorry, I was just checking the Twitter. So yeah, the YVR Dev Slack. So if you aren't on the YVR Dev Slack yet, you should definitely get on it. Speaking of which, I should probably share our video in the Slack as well. But yeah, jump on there, yvrdevslack.heroku.com. That'll give you the invite that you need to actually get on that Slack. It'd be nice if someday Slack fixes that, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. But there's a PHP channel in there. It's probably not as active as it was maybe a couple of months ago, but I think during the summer things slow down, and then we get a huge ramp up again in the winter. So hopefully we'll see some more stuff getting shared there. Sean and I will sometimes share random projects we come across. Sometimes I'll just cross-post stuff that I find on Hacker News that has PHP in it in some capacity. So and a bunch of different people have shared cool projects or cool repositories and packages that they've found. So check that out. Not only does it have the PHP channel, but it also has a bunch of other channels that are Vancouver related. It has a contracts and jobs channel, which is called Contracts and Gerbs. Then we have, so we also have channels for other things like server management, or there's even stuff about immigrating to Canada and things like that. So it's literally runs the gambit for subjects, and the people in there are really nice. So check it out.
And one thing for James, I know there's a bunch of non-Vancouver people watching. So YVR, he asked that. James LaChance asked that question.
Oh.
YVR, Vancouver, it's the designation for Vancouver, so our airport designation is YVR.
Yeah,
we're incredibly Canadian or creative Canadians like that. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, October 29th, I'll be on the Ops Show. So there's a company up here in Vancouver called CTO.ai, and they have this Ops Show that they put on. There's a bunch of really cool content out there. So I go on October 29th. I don't think it's a live show. I don't know when they would release the videos, but I'll be on there to talk about random things, probably stuff we talked about today and more. So people are curious, check it out on YouTube. Just Google the Ops Show.
Cool. And it'll be on YouTube at some point, whether it's live or not is to be determined, right? Okay.
Yeah, they've got a YouTube channel just like us, but they're a little bit more popular, or maybe a lot more popular.
Cool.
So we left in the sponsor tab because we want your money.
Yeah, give us some money. Yeah, so we are doing, maybe not doing these necessarily monthly, but we're doing them probably every 6-ish weeks. I guess is there a new schedule at this point, basically? And like our statement here says, things are archived on YouTube. So that's maybe a little bit more of a value add than a physical meetup where it's a one and done and it's only archived in the slides. These are now on YouTube, so it's sort of archived forever as long as the video is there, and we're not planning on removing any videos anytime soon. So if you're interested to sponsor, that would be a great opportunity. And like Sean is sort of alluding to, it's not necessarily just a Vancouver audience. As we're talking, there's people from someone in the chat mentioned they're from Toronto, so it's maybe a bit more skewed Canadian or skewed West Coast, but you might actually get to capture more of a wider audience than just the YVR audience that you otherwise would have. So please keep in mind the PHP Vancouver meetup if you're thinking of looking for people to hire, or you want to advertise your company, or you're just a recruiter and you're looking for people who are also looking for jobs. We've sort of had all types come to us and ask for sponsorships. So it'd be great to get some more people showing up and helping us support our group. We don't spend the money on nice, cool things for Sean and I. We put the money back into the group to pay for the meetup. It's what is it, $150 a year, Sean? Something like that.
Yeah, and we're also using the free StreamYard plan. Wouldn't mind getting the paid plan so we can do some cool things. Other than that, we've traditionally put the money back into the community, whether it's T-shirts or prizes, software, whatever.
Yeah, so it helps sort of just push our meetup forward. So it'd be greatly appreciated if you could do that. And the antithesis of that is if you see a sponsor here that you're interested in, please reach out and let them know that you saw them through our meetup, because that also helps give confidence to sponsors that doing this actually makes a difference. So if you see people or have heard of companies, please mention us if you can.
Absolutely. So as always, we have a PHP Storm giveaway. So because we missed August, we have 2 PHP Storm licenses to give away. Oh. And so how do we want to do this one, James? I know traditionally we've just picked the people who have posted in chat.
Yeah.
Do we want to do that again?
I think we could do one random person from the chat. So people in the chat, make sure you post a comment so your name gets entered in to be picked at random. And then maybe we could also do, we could quiz first person to give an answer for a question based on James's talk. What do you think? That's what we've done before in the past, where we just pick a little tidbit. So make sure you pay attention and listen. And the first person to answer the question, we call it out on our stream here. The first person to comment will get the license, and then their name will be withdrawn from the random chooser.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll ask that question after James, and in the chat, somebody can write the first person to write the correct answer.
Yeah. So just to summarize, make sure if you're watching, make sure you post your name in the chat so we know who you are, and we'll post the name of the winner in our Meetup group on Meetup.com, and we'll post the winner there. So if you see your name on the Meetup group, be sure to go to the Meetup group or check it, tomorrow or something to see if your name was called out, and we'll just need your email to send you the code. So comment, just say hello, say maybe if you're from. People are saying where they're from and using their Canadian codes. So yeah, comment and we'll pick a name, and you could win a PHP Storm. But you can use it on any JetBrains product.
Oh yeah.
PHP Storm. So
I should also say, because we do have people listening from outside of Vancouver, like Toronto, but not exclusive to Canadians. If you're an American or overseas watching, we'll include you too.
Yeah, this is not a country specific JetBrains code.
Yeah. The T-shirts, the famous T-shirts. So we still want to order these. We have the two designs, and what we've done in our YouTube videos, we've added this link. So if you haven't filled out the survey and you're interested in getting a T-shirt, please fill it out. COVID pending, we're going to get some of these orders and some of these things going. But if you would like to be notified once we actually figure this thing out, please put your name in there and we'll contact you.
Great. Yeah, I think one thing just to mention on that note is that the difference between, like, we did do a T-shirt once before, but we did it on Teespring, and it wasn't a great experience. It was like prohibitively expensive, and the shipping was like kind of a lot. Whereas this time, you're actually someone locally who would print a bunch of shirts. And the reason we're asking for the survey is so that we don't overprint or underprint the number of shirts. I mean, we'll probably run it a little bit higher than what our estimates are, just to make sure we don't run out. But basically, we want to pre-print the shirts and then you give them away or sell them at the events for different reasons. So that's sort of what the survey is for. It just helps us understand what our numbers are and what we should order and the quantities and the sizes and all that stuff.
And exactly, that's where sponsors also help. If a sponsor, we could order a bigger lump sum of shirt that we could give away for free.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be nice to give away some for we have JetBrains codes and stuff, but it'd be nice to give them away for people who are speaking or people who are answer questions or contribute in a meaningful way. So, yeah.
All right. Well, James LaChance has been sitting here patiently. I'm sure he's amped up, ready to rant. So, our speaker. Oh. You know what? I must not have saved, my apologies, I must not have saved my screen for James, and it says August, so I don't know what happened here. Did I open the wrong one? Man, maybe. Anyways, we have a speaker, James, and he's going to talk about, his title is Don't Fight the Framework. And if I know James, it's kind of, he's a ranty type of person. He and I connected, I think it was 4 weeks ago. I had a question for him about something or other. And when we went on he went on a 1 hour rant, a really fun and entertaining rant. I learned a lot. And I said, man, I have got to get you to come to this PHP meetup, and you can do the same for people here. Of course, I think he'll be a little bit more professional than he was in that one. But anyway, our speaker, James LaChance, I'll give you the opportunity to share your screen and kick off your talk here.
Okay. Screen-wise, I've got two distinct things really that I want to show. So I'm going to wait to share my screen for those. normally when I do these kinds of things, I have some amount of audience participation. So Sean and James, I'm going to ask you to at least participate as the audience, or maybe if people have comments in the YouTube, they can just put their comments here and you can read them back to me. And I realize there's going to be some amount of delay, but that's not fine. Or that is fine, I mean. So there's probably the big controversial one about facades. So I think I'll just go ahead and get that one out of the way. Let me hit the share screen button real quick. Okay. Can one of you tell me as long that you can see this? Like, are we sharing? I don't hear anybody else.
Yeah, we're all good. You can see everything.
Okay, cool. Okay. I'm going to assume that most people here are going to know what facades are, but I just want to make sure that we are on the same page. This route thing here, this is not a facade. This route definition, this is pretty basic Laravel route definition. However, these next three usages here are usage of facades. And this screenshot actually encapsulates one of the primary confusion points of why people do not like facades. This slide came from a talk that I gave 2019 Sunshine PHP Uncon Room, where this is probably a bulk of the talk and about how facades are probably one of the most complained about things of the Laravel framework. So what are facades? If you want to look at the buzzword definitions, what I call it, they're static proxies for service locators, which is full of programming words. But if you want to look at a more easy to define thing, it's a class that looks like it has static methods available, but really they're forwarded on to an object resolved out of the dependency container. And I realize the dependency container is still a little buzzwordy, but the important part to notice there is that these are coming from the dependency container, which if you don't know what a container is, it's maps very closely to dependency injection. It's not quite the same thing, but we'll get there over time. So here's kind of the complaints. They make your code tightly coupled. There's too much magic. And they're like static classes, except they aren't. It's very confusing. And for newer developers trying to understand things, this has a lot of merit. But over time, I do think that as you get more comfortable with the framework and the tooling, you'll find that it's actually not so hard to understand. So I'm going to cover what a static proxy is and how that's going to map to facades. So a proxy pattern just provides external access to internal state. Usually this is used to comply with the law of Demeter. The whole point of this is to make things easier to use. Facades utilize PHP's call static. Now, when I say facades here, I mean Laravel's facades, not the facade design pattern. They utilize PHP's call static magic method to proxy the method to the appropriate object, because again, it's going to pull something out of the dependency container for us. And like I said earlier, this is confusing when you first look into them, because that method is usually not defined on that facade. But some of them, such as this one here, storage fake, are defined. So the way I say this, if you were to actually go to use storage : fake, this would actually be used in a test. The reason why this one particularly is confusing is because you could go to that facade and you will see that fake method is defined there. But if you were to look for, say, the disk method, like the one we're looking up at this slide here, disk S3, that is not defined on the storage facade. So I do understand why this can be confusing. But we'll get to the power of this later. Service location. So what is it? Basically, this is reaching into the dependency container to ask for something rather than saying, I need a thing as a method parameter or something. And so you'll actually see a pattern like this in all sorts of places, not just in Laravel, but also in Symfony. So this app get foo, normally you would actually use the class name with the : class pseudo constant. But it doesn't really matter. It's just a key value pair storage system. But you would see this line of code here in Symfony controllers. I don't want to know if I'd say it's advertised that you should do it that way, but it's a thing you can do if you really wanted to, is my point. In Laravel, you could do the same thing. The same exact line of code works. It might need parentheses here in a Laravel controller. But the point is this line of code, especially in a test environment, is totally applicable. And then you'd also see these in Laravel as well. App is in the helper function, and then get or just app and foo. There's a couple other methods you can chain onto these two things, but the point is this is telling the container, this is the thing that I want. And then the main complaint about service location is that, again, you're reaching for something rather than letting something being given to you. I guess I already covered this slide. But the point is, the reason why this is too tightly coupled is because now that class knows a little bit too much about your application architecture. Again, if you're reaching into the app with the helper function, that class is inherently a little bit less portable now if you were to move it from project to project. There's a complete different argument to make here about if you want to make your code framework agnostic or not. I mean, we can maybe get into that later. But the point is, this is still better than actual static methods or directly instantiating new objects. And this is a very important point here, because if you actually instantiate new objects, well, now you've lost control of the object that you're able to, if you need like a test object or something. So we always hear this phrase as well, dependency injection. This is basically any state that you need is given directly to the object that, given directly to the class. So there's constructor and setter injectors, and there's also method injection. Those are pretty simple. It's either constructor parameter, or you have a setter function that accepts a parameter, or the method that you're calling would accept an argument of the thing being injected. If I need to dive into these, please let me know, whether it's Sean, James, or somebody from the comments. I'm intentionally breezing through this because I want to get to why facades are not bad. So why is this the right way? The whole point is that objects don't need to know anything about the dependencies or the surrounding code. This obviously means that particular class will be able to just say, as long as I have a thing that adheres to this interface, I know it has these functions available, which means I can write this code, and then you just don't care. You don't have to worry about reaching into a class or instantiating, reaching into a container or instantiating objects. I would say most of the point of dependency injection is to make testing possible. It's actually for runtime configuration, but I would say a majority case of this is going to be for testing, and sometimes different environments. You might want to use like a different email provider for your staging environment than your production environment, for example, or even local environment. Like you might use like Mailtrap or something for local stuff. So tight coupling, we've all seen some sort of thing like this, parenthesis, new foo arrow bar, or the most hated thing is a static function called on a class here. And I think the reason why this is bad is kind of obvious, because now you've lost control about this. So what we know about facades, how tightly coupled are they actually? I'd say this depends on your opinion of service location. But here are some interesting questions. Do facades allow testing to be easier? That answer is yes, and we'll get there in a little bit. Does it allow runtime configuration? Remember, environment switching is usually handled when dependencies are registered to the container. In the Laravel world, this usually means in a service provider somewhere. And is service location less portable? I think that answer is yes as well. So facades, the good parts. They provide an easy way to work with some features, and I would probably replace some with a lot of. They do make it easier for testing. They're immediately mockable, and you can easily change anything in the container via the swap function, and a lot of them also have a fake function. So here's a test. Cache should receive get. This is a method. This is kind of like a mockery, a forward on to mockery. So the should receive will give you a mockery object back, and it would call the should receive on the mocked object. And so you'd be mocking the get method. You would pass it some random value of key, and it would return some random value. So this is basically expecting your cache should have the get method called with a parameter of the value key, and this should return the value of value. You can do this in a test environment, and this will just work today. The alternative to doing this is something like this, where you do mockery mock cache class, and then you swap it in the application container, and then you would do cache should receive. And you can see that these 3 lines of code here are basically the same that we just wrote, except now we've gotten rid of these 2 lines. So we could do the same thing with a mailer, right? If you don't want to do should receive, or if you don't want to mock, if you're against mocking, then you can instantiate a fake mailer class that you write, mail swap fake mailer, and then you can fake mailer assert sent to foobar.com. This is very loosely related to how Mailthief works, if anybody has experience using Mailthief. And again, if I'm moving too quickly, please just let me know. So where would I find facade usage acceptable? Controllers, absolutely, depending on which ones you're using anyway, because controllers are kind of like the glue from the HTTP request to the actual logic handling of your application. In this one case, though, I would suggest using the actual injected request into the controller rather than the request facade, or the input facade, I guess, depending on which version of Laravel you're talking about. And of course, I think they're usable in test because they make testing easier depending on the use case. Where I find them unacceptable, middleware. You don't ever need to use any sort of request facade or input facade in a middleware because you already get it in your handle method. It's already a thing given to you. And at some points of a middleware or the application boot cycle, the container will have the wrong object. I actually ran into this problem. A buddy of mine, we're working at a place 4 years ago, where we were getting the right IP address in one middleware and the wrong IP address in another middleware because we were looking at a forwarded IP from an Amazon load balancer. And what ended up happening was the container started out with the right IP address, but it wasn't getting the updated middleware request all the way through the middleware until the end of the middleware happened, and it forwarded the call on to the controller. Since he was using the request facade in both places, he was getting two different IP addresses. Once we changed to using the injected request, that problem completely went away. I believe that Taylor even talked about this. I believe that Taylor also talked about this in one of his talks at Laracon, but don't quote me on that in case I'm wrong. So I also find them unacceptable in models. And this is completely from a testing perspective. There's a lot of things like checking if the authenticated user is another given user. And people would put in the user class some sort of like, if this arrow ID equals auth : ID. And the reason I'm not a fan of that is because now your tests, even in a Laravel framework, your tests get a little more complicated. Instead of passing that function to user object, and you could just unit test that easily, then you end up having to like set stuff up as the mocked authentication through like the auth guard and stuff in your test. And that just makes things a little more difficult. And there's no need for that. You can just easily pass in the user you're trying to compare it to. And the other place I find these a little unacceptable is popos or plain old PHP objects and or service classes. I hate this name service class because it basically, this entails anything that's not what I would consider a Laravel aware class. Laravel aware classes are jobs, artisan commands, controllers, middleware, anything that Laravel will actually instantiate and invoke for you is what I would consider Laravel aware. So, okay, I guess we went on to the jobs and commands. And the reason why I'm okay with them being in Laravel aware classes is specifically because Laravel has incredible, what they call auto-wiring dependency injection, where all you have to do is just type hint a constructor or the method that Laravel invokes for you with anything that Laravel can find through the container, and it will give it to you. And more than that, and this feels a little bit magical, if you type hint it with something that's not in the container, but it's able to instantiate the object because that object either has no constructor arguments or all of those constructor arguments are findable through the container, Laravel will even do that for you, which means one less thing you'd have to bind to the service, into the container through a service provider. Now, I would argue that's probably bad practice, but the fact that it can do that is very, very powerful. So what if we want to replace facades with dependency injection? A lot of people think this might be difficult, but it's not. In fact, there's an entire facade class reference in the docs. Actually, this is a little outdated. I don't know if this class reference is still there. I'd be surprised if it's not, though. So here you can actually look and you can see the service container binding. This is just this far right column here is the string in which the container will have the appropriate facade and the class that it uses for the container binding. So if you were to do like app and then the string of app, or app and the string of artisan, auth driver, so on and so forth, you would get these following facades. And this table is much longer than I have here, obviously. So that's one way you could figure out what you need to bind things to. And this would obviously be the class. If you were to type hint something with, say, this auth manager class, then you would be given that from the container, like a controller constructor or a controller method. So what if you don't want to do that? What if you want to find a more provable way, if you will? Well, you can find the facade accessor if you just open the facade, that class storage extends facade. I have these 3 dots here to signify there's more code here. There's more than just this facade accessor. But you'd see return file system. This is the string in which you would find the container binding for the storage facade. And a lot of these, if you just look at stuff like this, eliminate file system manager, this will be the thing that you get back. Now, sometimes you'll see two of these. Like you'll see like @C one class, @C another class. And in that case, you might need to look at both of them to find the method you're looking for. So in this case, here's how you do something like that. If you were to construct a mailer, $mailer, and you would set this is pretty standard dependency injection, you would see this mailer too. And the Laravel way that you might see people doing this is normally the mail facade and then the toFunction and send. These two lines of code would be synonymous, assuming this mailer is the same one that this facade here used. And you can see that I didn't namespace or anything, so we can just pretend. I didn't realize I duplicated the slide. I apologize. So the important thing is that facades always resolve your dependencies from the container. So anytime that you would rather use dependency injection, you can just do it. So that's kind of my rant on facades. You'll hear people a lot of times say facades are evil, facades are bad, facades make you a bad programmer. I would say if you implement your own facades, it's really easy to fall into the trap of writing hard to use code, hard to change code, hard to test code. But the facades that already exist, I think they're actually pretty powerful. They go through the container, so they make testing easier. And in pretty much all cases, if you use them in the right places, you'll avoid hard to test case scenarios. So while I'm screen sharing, I'll go ahead and hop over to one of my biggest pet peeves is people using related IDs and stuff. And what I mean by that is you'll oftentimes say we were to have like users and posts.
Sorry, James, maybe you could just bump your screen size a little bit. It's a little bit.
Oh, you're
small.
right. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Give it another bump. There we go. That looks great. Okay. That's perfect.
Okay. So a lot of times you'll see somebody create a post. Let's just go to a different method. Something like this. Post equals post, create, and then request all. Something like this. This is something that you might see in a controller somewhere. And I wouldn't say that this is inherently a bad thing, but if one of these request attributes is something like, let's do this. Whoops. Something like this, user ID, or maybe author ID, something like this, where if one of those fields is that thing, well, now I have a gripe. What I would prefer to see is either post make, and then maybe we could do the request all thing here. And then we could do something like user request. Something like this, because this will set the user ID for us on that post. And you might wonder, what's the gripe for? Because they amount to the same thing. And that answer is because they don't always amount to the same thing. And you might think that this is a contrived example, but what happens when you don't want user ID to be the related column anymore? Maybe you want it to be author ID, and then you change that in the model. Well, now you have to look for the string user ID throughout your entire code base. Some of those times, if you go back to the previous example I had up here with the create and the request all, you would have to also look through your front end code to see if it's submitting like an AJAX request or a form request or something, making that call. And I worked in a project where we had a pretty inconveniently named column, mailer, and then we had another column named mailer ID. And those things were so confusing to work with that we ended up saying we should just rename this. And we realized that we couldn't rename it easily because mailer means a lot of different things. Even in like a regular web development project that has nothing to do with physical mail, which is what this project was for. So mailer usually talks about email things. We're talking about physical mail, and having a mailer ID and a mailer column just got too confusing. And we never actually got to refactor that to be less confusing because the string was just used in too many places. And don't forget, if you want to go the other way, like say you already have a post object, like you can go through the inverse or the reciprocal relationship method too. And you could post associate, right? Or user, sorry, I'm bad at typing. And then request user. You could always do this too, right? Like this is always, like you can go both ways, assuming you have the user relationship stored on a post anyway. Like there's no reason that you actually have to do this one of the two ways. But the point is this actually makes refactoring easier. And I have examples in the same thing, like the save many here. Like if you're ever making a lot of posts, you can do the same thing and just do a save many, and then you can avoid the related IDs. Usually this one's a little bit easier to do and have audience participation because people ask questions about what if scenarios. And I mean, all honesty, this kind of probably sounds arrogant, but most what if scenarios end and it's avoidable if you really want to go through the relationship. I think this is the last one that I have a screen share for, but maybe one of my next gripes is about using collections. So I'll keep this up in case we want to give questions examples. So oftentimes I find that a lot of people will still use a good old for each loop. And let's just go down here and we'll just make an example code here. So somebody might have like for each post as post. I guess I don't need that. You guys get my point? And then we'll have like some sort of if. And then maybe in here we'll have some sort of like new array equals post name or something like this. So seeing this kind of stuff, I should probably do this, make this a little less confusing. So we might see something like this. Where under some weird condition, we might stuff this into another array and we'll do a transformation at the same time. Now, this particular loop is not too hard to read, and I'll admit that. But I don't see any reason why we can't just do this the functional approach, and maybe I guess we would do something like this. So the functional approach might say to do things like this, where we do a filter and a map separate. And I know we have new syntax in PHP 7.4, but I'm not going to worry about that in case that trips anybody up. These effectively do the same thing. And maybe in this super simple example, it's not the end of the world if we do this, especially because we only iterate over the list once instead of twice. But the problem that I have with this is normally it doesn't stop here. You might see like another level deep, right? And then another level deep. And maybe after that, you'll see some sort of like another loop and another one and another one, and another one. And this just gets really hard to follow. And if instead you were to filter and do a thing, and if that filter also had to do some sort of filter of an internal loop inside of it, then it could just be delegated out to like an internal function, something like this: return item. Let's call it item posts, maybe, or not posts, countries filter. Or that could actually be a custom collection if you wanted to go that route, and you could have like filtered countries or something. But the point is, you could throw another filter in here and do another thing, and everything would be a lot more readable at this point, to where we would get down to a short, concise filter, maybe another filter, or maybe some of the helper function. Most of these, I prefer them to be helper functions, like preferred countries, or something of that nature. And then this would have to be a custom collection function you'd have to write, which is a kind of like a framework specific thing. But there's no reason we couldn't do that in other frameworks also. But let's just get to a point where we can actually look at the code and what it's saying at once. And then if like maybe preferred countries, the implementation gives us preferred fruits, then we could rename it and it would make sense, rather than we go back up here and have to try and keep all of this context in our head of what would inevitably end up being like hundreds of lines of loops and if statements. Did all of that come through, James or Sean?
Yeah, I would say for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I would always add that I told people to follow this approach because I don't have to read what's inside of your loop now.
Right.
I know that filter returns a smaller array with a Boolean. I don't need to read what's in between the brackets. And then map, I know returns a new is going to be a new item that's being returned. So I know that you're making a new array just by reading 2 words. I don't have to read what's in between the braces.
Right. And then if for whatever reason you do need to care about, well, hey, this, like say you're filtering employee like types, like sales versus engineers, and then looking at names, and you scroll through and you happen to know that the filter's supposed to be engineers, and you see a sales employee, you're going to immediately be like, hey, wait, something's off with that filter. You don't have to like keep that whole loop structure in mind. You would just go to that filter, look what it's doing, and you click in. The condition would either be right there where you click into the helper function. And to me, that just makes parsing everything a lot easier. And it's almost inevitably the person who writes the big loop says, oh, no, it's easy to follow. And well, of course it is. That's your brain that wrote it. You're inherently going to have a better idea of where everything is than if you didn't write it. I would contest that same person to try to work on somebody else's 300 long line for each with nested ifs and loops inside of it.
I would also say that using the functional collection approach is also more testable, right? You can mock that method and return whatever you like.
Yeah, the only time I would actually test a collection specifically is if I was doing a custom collection. I would have some sort of unit test on that to prove it works the way I want it to. Otherwise, I'm going to be testing the thing that uses that collection to make sure that behavior is correct, rather than caring too much to mock it. But yeah, like you can't inject yourself inside of a for each loop, at least without severely hacking on the PHP core. This actually leads into the next thing. I actually phrased a lot of these to be a little controversial topics. Like this one was, or the previous related IDs were stop being lazy and using related IDs. One of my main takeaways with rants that I see with a lot of places is I would say stop aiming for minimum questions asked by your teammates and start aiming for maximum learning capabilities for everything. And this collections thing leads right into that. Like James and Sean, did you even know that custom collections were even a thing? Like they're documented, but I don't ever hear them talked about in the community.
You mean just calling new collection?
No, like there's a thing called eloquent collections or custom collections. Let me put the docs. Show you the docs. Maybe it's an eloquent. Oh, there it is. Okay. So here you can actually have this new collection on your model, and then you return this custom collection type. And make sure that when you do this, you actually extend the eloquent collection, not the Illuminate support collection. Actually, it's not even Illuminate support anymore. It got moved to another package. But you want to extend this thing when you create a custom collection, specifically so you can get like the load and there are a couple like the load is like a late eager loading type thing. If you want to like with, you do like post with user to eager load the user thing. If you already have a collection of posts and you want to not do an n+1, you can do I'll just show you in here.
Yeah, you're using just grabbing the relationship when you already have the
right. Like this
parent items, right?
Yeah, this line of code will do that. Like it'll grab the user profile inside of the posts, which will do just one extra query instead of inside of the loop. This code actually here is where I gave a talk about how to solve the n+1 problem using eager loading here at a local Tampa Bay Laravel presentation. Yeah, you can actually create this custom collection and throw this method on a model, and then you would get that custom collection back. If you were to do that for, say, like if this is the user model and then new collection. So instead of getting an eloquent database collection, you would get this custom collection. And then you could add all sorts of helper functions in there that would give you the ability to filter it in various ways. Like one of them I used was some sort of mail pieces. And we had all sorts of different mails. Like delivered mail, undelivered mail, mail of certain sizes, stuff like that. Mail that was either priority mail or mail that was standard ship. So we had all these various ways we wanted to filter that collection list down for various like admin views, and we just created a mail collection or whatever, so we could actually see the we wouldn't have to keep writing the same filters and maps. Basically, is my point there.
The sort of classic way, I guess, would be to just have like a fat model, right?
Right, but this is a way to not have a God object, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I don't think I was really aware of this. I'm sure it's been around for a while, but
A long time.
yeah.
I want to say
Cool.
it's at least 4.2. Don't quote me on that. At least Laravel 5 though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like, there's all sorts of things like this that a lot of people are hesitant to use in their project because it's too magical or too hard for newcomers to understand. And when I say newcomers, I typically mean like junior developers, not people who are already experienced in programming, but maybe not necessarily Laravel or your particular Laravel project. But it's odd because a lot of these same people have no problem introducing like 10 and 20 layers of abstraction for different things for some sort of programming purity principle. And like one of these examples is like the abort if, abort unless helper functions that you can throw inside of your controller. Those things are powerful. Instead of doing like an if, whatever condition, and then throw a new exception, foo, you can do abort if and then throw your condition in there, put your response code in if you really want the exception you're throwing, like or the exception class that you're throwing. It's a fantastic thing that you can use, and it's a one-liner that allows you to what might have been like 15 to 20 lines of conditions, reduced down to like 4, depending on what the if statements had, obviously. There are all sorts of these features that the Laravel has, like the optional helper that is kind of like a null safety operator. It's not an operator, it's a function. But it allows you to use objects that could be null and chain functions off of them. The downside to that particular helper is that you lose some IDE tooling there. But what's nice about it is that you don't have to write weird ternaries, weird conditionals. Sometimes null coalescing operator actually helped that out quite a bit and probably made the optional function obsolete. But there are a lot of these that Laravel has. Like you were talking about the support thing getting pulled onto, like all of the support helpers, like the string and the array helpers getting pulled out, and just now you need to use them statically. And I would argue those are fantastic uses of static classes. But having them be global-ish looking helper functions is kind of a magical thing because you can't look them up in the PHP documentation, but yet there are functions that are available to you. And then you kind of have to know some like composer magic happens going on there, like the files are getting auto loaded. And again, anything like this that is harder to exactly see where it's coming from, I understand why there's a gripe there because that means somebody has to learn something. But if everybody could actually learn the full Laravel ecosystem, everybody gets smarter. Or maybe not smarter, more knowledgeable. I don't know how you want to define smarter, but more knowledge is a good thing, not a bad thing. And your project only gets smaller in terms of like refactoring capability based off the more knowledge that the group, the collective group is able to achieve. Because if you only have one person that's able to review pull requests and point a couple of things out here and there, they're probably not going to be able to review every PR. So you get 2 people that know the framework really well, then 3 people, then 4 people. And at some point, your entire team is using things like form requests and policies and gates. You get outside of using the validation factory or the validator facade or whatever it is inside of a controller, and you might use the validate function on the controller. You might bump it up from there to a form request. Like there's so many options that you can just keep learning stuff, and as a group, and this allows you the freedom to finally use all of the framework's features. And I mean, as I'm scrolling through here, these docs don't look very long because he's collapsed. The decision has been made to collapse the navigation list on the side. But there's a lot of stuff here that a lot of people just haven't read. Something that I tell a lot of people, if they really want to understand what the framework can offer, just read this from start to bottom one day. Start at the prologue and end at official packages. It's a lot to read, and I don't expect anybody to memorize every single thing. But you get this fantastic overview of the framework's capabilities. And then as you're doing stuff, you might be like, oh, I think I remember the framework doing something like this for me. So at that point, you just go to the very top of the page here and you start searching stuff in the docs. The search is pretty powerful. So that's one of the biggest things I think that any team can do, and not even team, just for yourself. Like if your team doesn't want to have greater framework knowledge, do it yourself. Like even like if you don't do it on your own time, I get it. But, you know, spend like an hour here and there reading a couple pages of the docs, maybe 15, 20 minutes at a time. But you'll get such an understanding of what this framework can do for you. And I think too many people just rely on Laracast to tell them everything Laravel can do. And that's especially prevalent if you watch the Laravel tag on Stack Overflow. So I think my last point, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I think my last point here is that I'm really big on testing. And for those of you who didn't catch that, I'm going to share my screen one more time, actually. For those of you who didn't catch this, when I was actually showing this stuff, this code about the relationship IDs and stuff, I'm actually inside of a test file here. This talk that I gave about how to prevent eager loading, or how to prevent N+1 problem using the eager loading capabilities of Laravel, I gave this talk by executing tests. Every single one of these cases is a test. And you can see, I'm walking down through it, we have a setup method where we create some stuff. And then relationship without parentheses is different than, or relationship with and without parentheses are different things, is the point. We can ignore this. And this seems like such a simple thing, but a lot of people don't realize, actually this one of these needs to have parens. A lot of people don't realize why these things are different. I have seen so much confusion from people like, why is user with parentheses different than user without parentheses? So I'm so big on testing that's how I gave a presentation. And I think it's so important that you write tests that like you should, like, it's just part of the job. Like, it's not like, let me go ask permission for writing a test. Like, no, like, I think we're at a point in 2020, even before 20, I've been preaching this for years. We've been at a point for a long time to where it's proven that tests make your application more robust, and not doing it, there's just no good answer for it. And so for those people who do write tests and they brag about it, sorry, you're not special. Again, that's just expected of you. I'm sorry that the bar is so low that you feel like you're special for writing tests. And I understand why, because a lot of people don't. I don't think any application I've started at work, except my current job, had tests when I got there. And more importantly, the tests were passing. So that's going to kind of wrap it up. The testing is probably an overplayed cliche at this point, but it's still probably not said enough. This is actually the first point I was going to talk about, but I think the other things kind of flowed better for this particular rant. If there's anything else, Sean or JD, that you guys want to talk about, or that people have posted in the comments, I'd be happy to elaborate.
Yeah, we'll just we'll definitely open up the comments for questions. So people who have questions, please post them, and we'll just kill some time while those questions come in for the people who are watching. I just wanted to say, yeah, I was not someone in the past who would like read the entirety of the docs. Like I would breeze through. I'd kind of like get a feel for whatever I was working on, whatever package I was using, whatever framework I was using, and I just kind of like bumble my way through. And then 2 weeks later, someone like sees what you're writing. They're like, oh, you can do that in like one line, right? And I'm like, oh man, I had no idea. And like it's you act surprised, but then it was like my fault. Clearly, I didn't read the docs, but I was actually working on a really large Shopify project, and I used Sublime Text, and there was the package for Liquid, which is the templating system that they use, was really crappy. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to whip up my own really quick because I just wanted all the snippets available at my fingertips, and they just weren't there. And I was like, oh, it'll kind of give me an idea of like how the templating language works. But I basically ended up reading the Liquid docs from front to start, or from front to back, and my Liquid knowledge was like amazing. And it wasn't like I was doing it for my own vanity of like making my own plugin, but at the same time I became like really, really, really good at the Liquid docs because I literally had to read them all to like write all my snippets out and write all my completions out for the different tools and stuff like that. So yeah, reading the docs, it is tedious, but it definitely gives you like this hidden superpower, even if you're not like consciously aware of it, but being able to recall something exactly like you said, like, oh, I remember there was like a feature that lets you do like one thing, and you go back and you're like, oh yeah, it's like include when, in Blade, I can just be like pass an argument and it'll like do a thing. Like, oh, that's cool, I can do that. Or abort if or abort unless.
How about the Blade directive each? A lot of people ignore the last parameter in the series, which is this is the template to show when there's an empty collection. Most people don't know. You'll see people all the time. If collection not empty, include else, include this other thing. And I'm like,
dude, like second argument.
What's this for you?
My favorite one is so every time a new Laravel would come out, I started reading the helpers, like was the first thing I would read, and the collections page. So the collections, like read all the methods, know the methods. Then you know the difference between a map, a reduce, a flat map, difference what a zip is, or there's all these weird things which are really not obvious. So you can learn all those types of things. And one of the things that I use constantly is array get and object get, which I use all the time. And like you were talking about, like shaving down
data get.
Yeah,
then
data
it doesn't
get.
care if it's an array or an object.
So you can delegate to data get if you have an either case. So what? And that was like a perfect example of the if else. If you want to get some deeply nested value, especially if you're doing like JSON or something, and that second argument is like, what happens if it's undefined or something like that? Like, what do you want to return? Like, do you want default? It's null, but you could be like, oh, I want to return this default value. And then something that would be like, might be 10 lines of like checking to see if things exist in your config and then returning a default if they don't. Or the constant thing of like, if return and then return, you know what I mean? Like, and your first if state has a return, then you have your default value, which is if the if state doesn't fire, that all gets eliminated, turns into one line that just says data get, user, blah, 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 first name, and then second argument is no first name. And then you're done. It's one line. It's beautiful.
The one thing I could think of, there's so many times I've been in a meeting and I'll be in there thinking, I don't remember the exact total functionality, but I know there's something in the system that does this thing. And somebody is showing some code and they're doing a whole bunch of if else or nested loops or whatever. And I just say, oh, using your data get example, I just say there's something like data get. I've used this before. It's where if we go to the Laravel doc, something is in there for it to do that. And every time I swear I look like the smartest person in the room when I'm really not. I just happen to read through the documentation and I remembered some things about it. But yes, I can attest that reading through it is incredibly valuable. I also have to admit there are areas that I have not read, so that doesn't mean I'm no better than anybody else here, but that just I need to go back and reread them every single release or every now and then just to keep it fresh in what I miss. And I just want to pull this up from Dan Klassen in the chat. If someone took the time to write the docs, the least we can do is read them. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. Yeah, just a reminder for people in the comments, ask a question if you have a question in here. So actually, one of the things I wanted to ask was, you mentioned about where not to use the facades. So one place I don't know, maybe this captured in the plain object thing, but I noticed that you didn't mention service providers.
Okay, so that would be synonymous with middleware. Because service providers, they're kind of weird, right? So there's boot and there's register. Mm-hmm. And one happens before the other. In one of those cases, you can expect nothing in the container, or let me rephrase, you should expect nothing to exist in the container. And then the other case, you should expect at least all of the core stuff to exist in the container. And then you get to your own order of operations of whether you should expect your own stuff to be in there or not, because again, that depends on where people will bind stuff to the container. So in terms of facades, I would try really hard to avoid using them. And I actually, offhand, I can't think of a good use case where I'd actually want to use a facade on a service provider. That doesn't mean that there's not a good reason to. It's just I can't think of a time when I've thought about doing it and said, oh, maybe not because this could bite me.
Well, I mean, all of the included service providers have facade references in them, right? Like you mentioned the route one. In the route service provider, there's a call to the route facade to register, isn't there? To register the paths and stuff like that.
I don't. Is it a route facade or is it just the route static accessor? Let's see.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think also auth might be the same for the auth server provider when you're making.
It's the route facade. You're right.
Yeah. So I would suspect. I mean, and the case that I was going to bring up was that one time I had to do some stuff with a queue, and the queue facade I was calling in my service provider, but I was like, well, where else am I going to put this? Because I would expect the first service provider to be that one where it's like, I create my own facades by calling like app make, and sometimes in the providers, which like I know they're not the same, but you can still resolve a facade out of the container using app, right? Mm-hmm. I believe at least most of them you can. So
the facade, not the facade object, but the thing the facade would pull out of the container for you.
Okay,
like the same object the facade would give you, but
the
facade class itself is a little different, right? Because there's that facade accessor that has it. Yeah.
And then so what's the service provider sort of situation then?
Again, I can't think of a time where anything I've put into the service provider would mess with any of the facades that already exist. That doesn't mean that there's not a case for it. I just can't think of a time I've done it.
Yeah.
But for stuff that the framework wants, man, that's a good question because you have to reach into the container in some way. And again, I've already made it very clear. If you're okay with service location, you can't complain about facades because it's a very, very good very good service location handler. It's a super powerful one.
So how do you feel about those the automatic facades, or what are they called?
How do I feel about what?
The automatic facades, like what are they called? The ones that you can make them by like adding facade or something at the end of the class. What is that called?
I'm sorry. You keep. I think it's my computer, but you freeze every couple seconds. Can you either type it in our chat or just say it again?
Yeah. What was automatic facades?
I think what are those called?
Do you know what they're called, Sean?
Oh, let me pull up the docs. I know exactly what you're talking about. They're the facades that aren't facades that you can turn into facades by playing with the namespace.
Yeah. You got me blanking too.
That is magic. That's
it's very
it's magic, but it's Laravel. As Anthony would always say, it's Laravel magic. So it's good magic.
What is the name? Real-time facades. That's
it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually pretty against these, which is ironic because I talk about learning all the framework's features and other things. The reason specifically that I'm against these is because even if you're an experienced developer, even a Laravel knowledgeable experienced developer, the chances of you missing that facade prefix in the namespace is very high. Prefix or suffix, I forget which. I'll go check the docs so I'm not speaking out or incorrectly here. It's a prefix. So the way those work, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, is remember that the namespace support that we have in PHP is just some sort of standard that was agreed upon so many years ago that we map that namespace to a directory structure. It doesn't have to be that way at all. Like the autoloader is one that exists in Composer, but you can write your own autoloader handler of some sort and use the SPO autoload register. I forget the name of the function, but there is a function that PHP provides you to talk about autoloading logic. And all that means is Taylor has registered his own for Laravel, and it will look to see if there's a prefix of facades at the front of a namespace. And if it is, it'll chop it off, and then we'll try to instantiate that object for you. Like if you're going to do that, why not just let it automatically resolve through the container and not bind it through a service provider? You get the same benefit that way, but no confusion at all.
Yeah, I never understood I saw it was like, oh, that's kind of slick, but it's more like cool autoloader hacks more than like great ways to chop your program up. Right. Yeah, I mean, like just use the container. It's so much easier. It's actually less work probably because you can just use a plain class and not have to worry about namespaces.
No. So it's okay. So real-time facade, it allows you to write a plain class, and then you would like use facade /JD /plain class, and then allow you to plain class : any function that exists on that class, whether it's static or not, and that will just work like a facade. And then it also allows you to do other facade type stuff to it. But the reason why that's so rough is because if you were to instead, like say you're in a controller, like index or show, if an index, instead of using it at the top, like importing it at the top and then using it as a static object in your index method, put plain class or use it at the top without the facade prefix, like use JD/plain class, and then type in an object with the plain class. That seemed redundant, but I think you get my point. And then inside your code, you get like $plain class arrow, whatever function. And that would just work, even if you don't bind it to the container. If it's resolvable as a real-time facade, it's also resolvable as a class that can just be automatically instantiated through the auto wiring dependency injection system. So given that, you can completely eliminate the confusion for literally anybody who does. Most people are going to think that it's bound in a container somewhere, so there is a layer of confusion. So it's kind of misdirection. But the point is, it's a lot less confusing than a real-time facade of like, where do I find this thing? Like, you have to know that because you can't control click into it with PHPstorm. Maybe you can with the right plugins or something. I don't use PHPstorm. But
Yeah, no, Sean, do you know if you can, if PHPstorm will resolve that properly, or does someone in the comments know if it'll resolve? I know that a lot of IDEs have trouble with facades just in general. And like even the linters will say, like, some of them, if you don't have them set up right, will be like, don't call this statically.
Yeah.
if you use the facade, like if you import the facade, like use Luminix support, facades, whatever, then those linters and the editor will be a lot happier. Because some years ago, I want to say maybe 3 years ago, I don't think it was Taylor specifically. I think he just merged the PR where somebody just went ham and added a bunch of the app method annotations to the facades.
Mm-hmm.
So that way the IDEs would be happier. Because like the old way to do this, you had to use the IDE helper, like Barry, VDH, I forget his name. But the IDE helper thing that's basically a Laravel only tool. Because of all of these types of things that people complain about their editor not being able to handle. And I don't know if that tool knows about real-time facades either.
You'd probably have to regenerate the file every time anyway, because the facades would be... Well, every time you make a new facade, you'd have to run the tool, right?
Yeah, but anytime you make model changes, you have to regenerate the thing. Like, it's best to do that on some sort of Git hook, if you ask me.
Yeah, or watch a folder of some kind, your app folder.
You know, I wanted to bring up one thing. Like, I remember, James, you and I had a conversation, probably going back 2 years now, about this very topic of don't fight the framework, and where the experience we were having with people that didn't trust the framework, so they fought back. So they didn't trust it, so they would, let's say, I know there's some people in the chat that are still working for that company, so apologies in advance, but one of the examples was using Doctrine over Eloquent. So Eloquent was still getting instantiated within the system, still getting loaded. Meanwhile, Doctrine was also being loaded. And there were a bunch of other things similar to that. They spent so much time fighting that framework to the point that for myself, it became very, very hard to write simple input, output API endpoint. Mm-hmm. And that's all. It wasn't rocket science. It wasn't crazy security apps. It was input, output. And it became so complicated because I was there, I'm responsible. We as a group, we fought the framework. And we fought the framework, and to the point that the framework won, in my opinion. And now when it comes to planning, before I left that company, the planning, we had to consider all the extra time to add the extra complexity that was thrown in. If we hadn't, we would have been so quick, incredibly quick to deliver things. And I think thinking back to James LaChance's, what he showed with the relationship, the think and the attach and all that, writing the test that have some of those Laravel assert methods, it's all there. Mm-hmm. It's all tested by thousands, if not millions of developers who use it daily, and it has its own built-in test suite. So why not trust that framework? Like, it just boggled. I think I forget how you said it, but it was something that just boggled your mind that people are not relying on it. It's a very popular framework. It's not a one-off jQuery package that has only one like.
Yeah. Well, like I remember at that particular company, I remember saying to you and a couple other people, like, we shouldn't even put Laravel on our job applications because like it didn't matter. Laravel was just like, it might as well have been like Slim PHP and you're just bringing your own tools because it was like, well, we're not using Eloquent. If we're not using Eloquent, how much of Laravel are you really using? Because Eloquent, as those Eloquent objects get tossed around, there's a lot of stuff that's just helping you navigate that relationship with your data and your actual functional procedural code. So like, if you're not using Eloquent and you're not using, I think there was another thing that we weren't using that was in there. It was, we were using CQRS, right?
Yeah.
So you're not using Doctor, or you're not using Eloquent. You're not using like RESTful. This maybe in this a more classic way. So your controllers are kind of like, your controllers kind of get messed up. You can't use any of the CRUD stuff that comes out of the box. You can't use any of the nice methods on the route facade or the route static class or whatever it is there in that routes PHP. Like you can't use that. You can't use any of that stuff. You can't use any of that API stuff that you could do like route API controller or something like that, whatever that is, where you can like make a whole controller, just wrap it all up. You can't use like a lot of the built-in auth stuff. You'd have to roll from scratch because it's like it would map, the default one like maps to a model. It expects a model to be used or something like that. So
did you guys work together in 2014, 2015?
no, it would have been 2018.
Yeah.
Well, that was like the year all of that stuff really just like spread through the community like wildfire.
You know what? That I think that's when they started this app around then, and then I came along a year later, and then James came along the year after, which would have been 2018, I think.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just I used to give this when I used to do client services. I used to tell the clients, like, they'd come to me and they would say like, you know, they try to get this like amazing project for like no money, or like they'd be trying to buy all these features that they didn't need and ignoring these features that they did need. And so I used to tell them like, your website is like a car. Like if you need a truck, you just need to start with a truck. You can't buy a sedan and turn it into a truck. First off, like it's a bad investment. Like you're going to what are you going to take the wheels off, make them bigger? You're going to put a roof rack on it. You're going to drag a trailer behind it. Like you can do all that stuff, but you really, really wanted the truck. So you should have just bought the truck instead of buying the car and modifying it, or buy the cheapest car you can until you can afford the truck. Like you have to make these mental investments and actually decide, okay, well, they are the term investment. I mean that literally, as in like you're going to get in what you put out, and if you don't put in enough, you're not going to get that return that you need. Or if you make a bad investment, you end up losing all your money, and then you have to pay it back twice. There's interest on those investments. So if you really want to invest outside the framework, you have to be willing to pay the interest. And so by using other things like Doctrine or using less conventional approaches to maybe like how you do your HTTP with something like CQRS, although it's not unpopular, but it's very unconventional. So now you need to think, well, what's the investment in training I need to make now? What's the in all those docs that are written about REST are all garbage now in Laravel. They're trash. You can't even use them. All those docs in Laravel about Eloquent are all useless to you now. And so you took this thing that was giving you so much for free and you threw out a bunch of stuff that actually gave it value. And so you ended up just throwing, it's like stripping down your apartment only to repaint the walls the same color they already were. You know, you're like, well, why'd you do that? It's like, well, I didn't paint them, so it couldn't have been that good. Like I just didn't like the shade of white that was on there. It's like, what? This is insanity, man. You're giving up so much for nothing. But that's my rant.
No, like that's a super solid rant. I think that was part of the thing I was ranting with Sean when we and I had that conversation a couple months ago or whatever it was. Like I completely agree with you. The entire point of using a framework or any package is nobody will actually say onboarding, but that's the win, right? Anybody who knows that tool can now join your team and know how to use that tool. They don't have to figure out how your crap works. And I say crap literally because most people's own stuff sucks, including mine.
Like as a senior developer, I look at it as my role to make that kind of like thinking of like time to live in the like internet world of things. It's just like, what's that time to productivity? How short can we make that? That's like really important, especially as someone who's in charge of a project from an architectural standpoint. You want to shorten that time to productivity to as tiny as you can make it, because that also means turnover is also then a lot cheaper. Like I'm sure we've all worked at a company where a turnover of a major employee is like completely devastating and it sets you back like months. Where it's like, well, time to productivity benefits everyone across the board. It benefits the juniors; they're not going to be thrown into the fire immediately, and it benefits the senior administrative staff who, if they leave, you can more easily replace them than you otherwise would have, because your whole mentality around how you actually manage your people resources is on making sure that they're as productive as possible as soon as possible. It's just like, it's hard to know that without getting stung so many times and getting the PTSD and the trauma of like not having that. So Sean and I both have that PTSD.
Yeah. I also have the PTSD in a startup sense where I had my own company, but I spent and this was years ago, I spent so much time trying to perfect the software, make the most enterprisey, best level software. It's been 3 years, maybe 2.5, but 2 years building it. And when I launched it, I was dead in the water. All my competitors had millions of dollars of revenue, and I had no way to compete. I had no marketing dollars. I had no product market fit, anything. So I learned my lesson there in the startup world, and that's what I love about Laravel. Now that I understand more about the framework, I could just get a whole bunch of shit done fast, and it's good. It scales, and it scales as long as I, make sure I understand the N+1 problems, the SQL problems, and all that stuff. But I think we're living in quite a blessed time, aside from it being a pandemic, but and then kind of cycling back to people dumping on Taylor, saying that JetStream is garbage. And you know what? If it is, well, make it like, what is garbage about it? I think that's one of the things he asked. What is the bloat, so that he can go and fix it? What is he not seeing? And if people just jump out there saying, "Oh, I don't trust Laravel, so I'm going to throw TQRS on it. Oh, I don't trust JetStream because it's bloated." Well, why?
Forget that. Instead of why, make your own thing and release it.
Yeah.
Stop complaining about the free shit you get and put your own out there and let it be criticized publicly. Oh, you're right. Nobody will probably hear about it. That's the real truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally not Zonda to do that.
Oh, somebody had to say Zonda, didn't they?
All right. Well, we got, I don't know if you count my thing as much of a rant, but you got 2 James rants for one in this talk here.
I'm always ready to rant on something.
I think we need to link up sometime, dude. We could probably just go for hours.
The James squared rant session.
Yeah, maybe I'll put a poll somewhere. How many people really want to see the 2 James talking head rants for a whole hour? I know I would.
I think it might be fun if we could find something he and I disagree on.
Yeah. I wonder what it'd be. How about Vim usage?
I won't go as far as the crap show that happened on Twitter with some, I assume we're junior views a mouse. But I mean, you were looking at my Vim earlier, so I'll put it at that.
Yeah, Vim is one of those things. That's a point of contention for a lot of developers.
Are you a Vimmer?
No, I use it sometimes. I use it just for convenience. Sometimes if I just want to tweak a line, I'm a Sublime diehard. So.
Dude, I used to be also. I was pretty reluctant to go to Vim. Yeah. I kind of got triple teamed by a really good friend of mine, a coworker, and another good friend of mine. And they were all just like, you have this like super crazy, hard to understand like tiling workflow desktop thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you use Vim? And I'm like, because I don't want to take the time to learn it. Like literally, that was the answer. And I finally bit the bullet. I see the light. I love it. You'll never get me back to an editor that doesn't have a really good Vim. VS Code has a really cool Vim plugin that you can either use its Vim emulator or you can use a NeoVim RPC.
Yeah.
Which will like send stuff out to like a real Vim. I mean, it's NeoVim, so it's not Vim, whatever. But like you get all of the actual capabilities of Vim inside of VS Code. So
yeah, Sublime.
Pull me in would be that.
Sublime is a similar thing where you just have a NeoVim client in the background, right? And it'll just call it.
I didn't realize that Sublime had a similar plugin for that now.
I think just because NeoVim allows the RPC connection, right? Like, so you can, a lot of the GUIs that pop up are all using that in some capacity, right? You can actually use it from you can send letters to your Vim instance in like other tabs. It's kind of cool things you can do with that stuff. But so I've used Vim, like I've given it a serious try. I could never get over that hurdle of like, Sublime is just, it's so good. It's multiple cursors. That's what keeps me.
So I've got a Twitter, what is it, a moment? What are those things where you post a series of tweets to? For a while I was doing a daily Laravel, like learn Laravel daily or something, not Laravel, learn Vim daily.
Yeah.
And it was just something really simple. A friend of mine who goes to the Laravel meetups here, he randomly just tweeted one day, free project idea. Give me one Vim tip a day so I can slowly learn Vim. And I responded to it, and he DM'd me in Slack and goes, dude, low key, you're the one who I was hoping to respond to this because I know how much you like Vim. And so I stuck with it all the way right up until the pandemic happened. And that's actually not why I stopped. I was going through some personal stuff at the time. That's really what kind of got me to stop doing it. I wasn't motivated enough to come up with stuff. Like if I don't have it every day at the same time, then the schedule's messed up. So that means I have to come up with stuff ahead of time, like on the weekend, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got to a point in my life I just wasn't motivated to think of stuff ahead of time, and I kind of exhausted all of the like low-hanging fruit, I guess. Like there are some just, like obvious wins in Vim. Like most people know HJKL :WQ or :Q bang. That's the extent of most Vim knowledge for people who don't want to learn Vim. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of obvious wins, like the F key and T, or F and Shift T.
Change inside is amazing.
What do you mean by changing? CI.
Yeah, CI.
Yeah. So it's like I'm so surprised you know that. To be honest, most people don't know text objects.
I mean, it's handy. I mean, I watched the full like Laracast on him doing it, and I learned like a ton of stuff. But that other stuff, like changing inside things, like things that are a little bit less, like there's no way to do that in Sublime really. And you can select the word. Oh, what's that?
Unless you use the Vim mode you were talking about.
Yeah. But then there's things that I lose too, which is like I'm still fighting with like the shortcuts because like, I mean, granted, a lot of the shortcuts are control and like. All of the shortcuts are control in Vim when in a terminal, but in Sublime, there's a mix of a whole bunch of stuff. So, but yeah.
Yeah, the idea with Vim shortcuts is since Vim's a modal editor, when you set up your key mappings, you can actually set up a key mapping for normal mode or insert mode or both, or visual mode, or I mean, there's several modes. Like there's command mode, EX mode, replace mode. Like there's a lot of Vim modes. And the nice thing about that is, for example, here's a thing that I can do in Vim that I don't know if you can do in Sublime. Sublime will give you the automatic like closing parenthesis or bracket or curly brace, right? Like if you do an opening paren, you get the closing one.
Yeah.
How do you put the semicolon at the end of the line? You just have to keep typing characters until you get to the end of the line, even if you overwrite the parenthesis, right?
It depends. So what do you mean, like at the end? Like if you're
at the beginning of the line, you want to jump all the way to the end. There is a key to do that. It's been so long for me that I can't remember.
You just press command left, command right. Will jump to the beginning and start of a line.
Right. So you're moving your hand from home row down to the arrows, right?
Well, if you pressed shift brace and opened a brace, hit enter, went to new line, and you typed DD, open close brace, semicolon, you're at the end of the line and your brace is already in the right spot.
Right. So where I'm getting with that is I don't have to type a semicolon, or not a semicolon, like a closing brace. Like if I type like like DD then like open paren, like another function, or maybe like class arrow function, open paren. I don't have to overwrite my parentheses. I can just double tap semicolon, and that just throws one at the end.
Oh, Sublime will actually format and put you back in the middle.
Right, but will it give you that semicolon though? Because like I can basically what I'm saying is I don't have to type all of my closing parentheses. Which if it's only one, it's not the end of the world. But if you've got like 3 of them chained, it's actually really obnoxious, right?
I see what you mean. Yeah, you'd probably have to do some sort of like custom snippet for that.
Right.
So, but yeah, not really out of the box. I don't really know. I mean, I actually have.
This isn't out of the box. It's a mapping I put in, but it's a trivial mapping to add. My point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Sublime doesn't have the same type of mapping capabilities, like not even close. But I have been playing with the Python. I've written a couple of plugins now using the Python API, or like contributed to some because I was just getting fed up with some that weren't as good, or there was bugs in them. And there's like they have this concept of like objects as well in the Python API, so you can like do things. So you probably could just write a plugin for your language. Because, like, obviously in PHP, the semicolon has to be there, but in JavaScript, it doesn't have to be there. Or, like, Go, it doesn't have to be there either. So, like, depends on the language. So you could probably write one that says, like, hey, if I have, under the conditions that I'm starting, or if I've opened a brace and I'm typing or whatever, or I'm closing, it could probably be aware that, like, hey, if I add parentheses in the middle of something, the semicolon should always be at the end of whatever I'm doing. I don't know what the exact logic would be, but yeah, I'm sure you could do that, but it would be an undertaking for sure.
It would be less trivial than a mapping where I double tap semicolon or comma if I'm adding an array item.
Well, they do have macros in Vim too. Sublime, but I've just never used them because like I found snippets to be way more useful. But you can do you can record like in Vim, you can record a macro and like you want to replay the same strokes over a bunch of different lines, right? You could also do the same thing where you could record your strokes and then I think you can replay them in some capacity. So you could probably do a macro that just does some keyboard foo behind the scenes and then puts you right in the right spot. But,
yeah, the multiple cursor support in Sublime kind of doesn't completely defeat the point of macros, but it does a lot to making them not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually one thing I do like about Vim too, especially like if I'm on a server, I always use Vim. Like I don't even bother looking at anything else because like I'm not going to use Nano. That's a piece of junk. I'm not going to use Less. It barely even works. Like I'm just going to use Vim.
Less, but Less is a fantastic reader.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Did you realize that Vim stuff works in Less?
Yeah. Like I'll just press like GG and like go wherever. Like press 10J and go wherever I need to go.
Control D, Control U. You can search with like the / It's fantastic.
Yeah. Pretty sweet, but yeah, I think we should wrap it up because I think the editor talk might be next month.
Yeah.
Funny enough, Adam Wathan talked about wanting to do a Sublime versus Vim race, and I don't know of any way to make that fair because if a Vimmer were to be the one to write that test, then like a Vimmer is going to know how to make it difficult for Sublime because you can know what's easy to do in Vim, and by proxy, like what's hard to do in insert only mode, which is every other editor basically.
Well, I think it depends. Like if you want to in Vim, if you want to select all matching words and change them, you'd have to do a search and replace, right? But in Sublime,
there's also a plugin that I've got for that.
Well, I guess you'd probably have to set the rules to be like, are you just using like if you had plugins, then I mean it'll be a nonstop, like every week that there'll be a new winner who just like writes a new plugin to like make the next thing better.
Well,
as far as like base,
is like your current Vim setup versus somebody's current Sublime setup.
Oh, I see. Okay,
you know what I mean?
I thought you meant like
test ahead of time. Like, well, let me go see if there's any plugins to help me cheat. Like that seems a little obnoxious, but at the same time, like if you're both be given the same test, then whoever's the faster reader is going to win. Right?
Yeah, I think you'd have to do if you had each team come up with a series of challenges, and then everyone just has a fresh Vim and maybe not fresh Vim because I think that's a little cruel, but if you had fresh Sublime,
totally
fresh Sublime and maybe like a limited Vim RC, you could have a pretty wicked battle.
Well, how about instead of fresh anything? How about like what you would think of as a typical Vim RC? And like one way to do it is a lot of people, Vimmers especially, will have like .files repos. And you could just go see like, okay, you're going to use a Vim configuration that's from your .files, like, and it has to be something that you didn't modify within the past some amount of time, like, a couple days before this test or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something like you would expect to use. Because like if you were to ask me to use Vim without most of my plugins, like that means I wouldn't get autocomplete through like IntelliSense type stuff. I wouldn't be able to do that. Like I use PHP Actor, which is kind of like IntelliSense for VS Code.
Yeah.
It's a language server for PHP.
Yeah.
So it's like I use that on a daily basis for my job, right?
I mean, I use LSP and Sublime too. Like I set it up.
Right. So but if we were to both use fresh stuff, then like that would go away for the both of us kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would suck.
Which is not an accurate representation of what your day-to-day work life is, which I think if you were to go for a test, you would want it to be strive toward your actual day-to-day, not something optimized to win a stupid internet points contest, but at the same time, not something kneecapped.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
I think it's a cool concept. I mean, I think someone who is I think it'd be nice to see someone who is a longtime Vim or Sublime user, like compare two things that are like problems. Like you just had that situation where you're typing in a bunch of stuff, or you were jumping around, or you have relative line numbers, right? So you were jumped up relative line numbers to the next thing, which in Sublime would be a little bit tricky to jump up that quickly to a relative number. You'd have to type in the absolute number to jump up. So You can't say like jump up 3 lines. You'd have to actually press Command P and enter colon whatever and enter.
Or Command G and be a boss and not have to put in the colon.
Oh.
Did I out Sublime you and I haven't used it in 5 years?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can also do, there's also like all the stuff that's there to like jump to different things. Like you can jump into side of a function too, and like, how are you going to get there? If it's closer to the top, closer to the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're still doing editor wars.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up. I see our while they're low user numbers, they are going down. So some people are like, yeah, I'm done. Anyways, now we get 2 rants from James and a whole Vim versus Sublime talk for free.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just going to share the screen, go back to our presentation here. Oh, I've updated it. I had forgot to change one of the slides, but yeah, the talk, James LaChance, Don't Fight the Framework, Ranting with James. And the next...
I forgot to put the squared.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have.
That's the post-game show.
Right, I'm not that smart. We had a tab for online etiquette, and I know we probably should have had this one before, but James, do you want to talk a bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a pre-slide really for our just people who are watching or going to be watching in the future. Just really just for the chat. Main thing is that the chat, the real-time chat disappears when the video goes live. Like it's not. They're not comments. They're like it's in a different place. So when you're actually watching the video, you can see that chat, but the comments is something else. So just keep that in mind. If you're like commenting on the video, that's not the same as being in the chat. So just keep that in mind. And then we also asked for like people asking questions and stuff like that, or like saying hello. And people who said hello are entered into our list to get the JetBrains thing. Oh, we should ask the question.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The question, you had it.
Yeah. So the people in the chat, what were the 2 places that where facades were acceptable? There was only 2 places. What 2 places were those places?
Per James LaChance.
So people in the chat. I know there's people in there. Just got a comment. What were the 2 places?
I think that's an unfair question.
Well, you did have a slide that said, these are the 2 places to use it. And there was 2 words in there. I'm just looking for those 2 words.
Yeah, but the problem is one of those words actually meant more than one place.
I guess, the spirit of the slide still remains. Right?
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's going to get this, eh?
Well, let's keep it open. And if not, we can...
Oh, sometimes service providers, not middleware. Oh, controllers, so that's 1. Not middleware is technically true too, but that was in the no slide, not the yes slide. There's another one, Bob. You're close. You're very close. Oh, didn't you say you already have a JetBrains license, Bob? Although, to be fair, Bob, you can use it on any JetBrains product. So if you want to use it on something else, or give it to a friend who you're trying to convert to PHP Storm.
Yeah.
As long as they install the Vim plugin to PHP Storm.
Maybe you could give it to James Doyle, get him off of Sublime onto a real IDE.
No way. I need to get extra RAM so I can start it up.
Well, all right. Bob's entered. He said,
well, the answer was controllers and tests. That was the answer. So we'll pick two. We'll pick Bob and then another random person from our list here.
Yeah.
There was a third one. Laravel aware classes that I said is also acceptable.
Oh yeah.
Middleware, commands, etc.
Yeah, you had the yes and the no slide, so I just sort of picked the two from the no slide or the yes slide.
I think there's another yes slide. Let me check.
I need feedback.
Great, but I think we can wrap it up there, and we'll post the winners of the stuff in the PHP Meetup group. So if you're not part of the group, join the group just so you get notifications. We'll also post the link to the slides and the link to the video, and for people for posterity's sake. I think for a PHP Meetup, I think we'll try to have more of these more often. I don't know, Sean, if you want to stick to the 6-week schedule, or we'll sort of see how next month is feeling. Or December we usually skip just because it's like holiday season, and then I think we very rarely do January. It just depends on what the deal is. Maybe tail end of January, but we'll just sort of keep everyone posted on what the schedule is going to be as we get farther into the holiday season. I mean, it's not like anyone's traveling anywhere, so
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we should consider opening up December. The problem with December in the past was getting people in Vancouver to come because they would be traveling or on vacation, or the weather just wasn't cooperating. Well, there's no excuse. You're at home. Get on the YouTube. But in terms of the 6-week thing, I wouldn't mind more. But the whole more thing comes down to speakers. So if there are more speakers, and the one thing about being remote now is we can start reaching out to people outside of the Vancouver area, like James is in Florida, or James LaChance is in Florida. So there's a lot more to choose from. So if there are people watching and they want to speak and they're not from Vancouver, please contact us. We'd love to hear what you have to say. If you know someone, a friend of yours who might be interested in sharing some rants or topics or knowledge, we're always open, and I think we're always willing to do more than less.
Definitely.
But yeah, it really comes down to finding the speakers who are willing to share their time and knowledge. So that kind of goes into our meetup goals. More meetups, smaller talks, useful info. This one kind of went on a little bit longer than we planned because we went into further rants, but I think that's a good thing. And the mantra of our group, learn something that you can make money tomorrow. James, you're the one that I think that came up with that one.
Yeah, I mean, for this thing, we probably learned. I would say we definitely learned about facades and like when and why to use them, and maybe when not to use them. So as far as like making you money, I definitely think that you could convert that into some time saved, which at the end of the day is money, right? So, or at least you can maybe make your application more testable, therefore maybe reduce some bugs. So, and now you just know more. So when you know more, you're more valuable.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of going over the final slide, I'll put the link to the T-shirt survey in the video comment thing or the description. Please fill it out if you're interested. And sponsorship presenting, get involved, please. Twitter, PHP Vancouver. And thank you. See you in a month or 3 weeks or 6 weeks. We'll figure that out. Yeah. Help us find people, and we will present.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James LaChance.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.